There are relationships that end with heartbreak, and then there are relationships that leave you wondering what happened to you. You remember the arguments, the confusion, and the moments when you no longer trusted your own judgment, and the strange feeling that you were living inside a situation you could not fully explain. The original message describes that experience through a spiritual lens, arguing that what seemed like a destructive romance may have felt like something much deeper than an ordinary breakup. But whether you understand that experience spiritually, psychologically, or simply as the result of a deeply unhealthy relationship, one question remains: why was it so difficult to walk away? Message suggests that the person at the center of this relationship was not simply behaving badly, but was being influenced by what the speaker describes as dark spiritual attachments. That is a spiritual interpretation rather than something that can be independently established as fact. But it becomes the framework through which the entire experience is explained. According to this perspective, the person you loved may have shown vulnerability, cried, apologized, or occasionally revealed genuine tenderness, while still behaving in ways that repeatedly caused harm. That contradiction is what can make a destructive relationship so difficult to understand. You may remember the good moments just as clearly as the painful ones. And those good moments can make you believe that the person you hoped they could become is still somewhere inside them. The message argues that this hope can keep someone trapped, especially when they believe that enough patience, forgiveness, or love might eventually bring that better version of the person forward. It then points to the strange experiences that often accompany an intensely unhealthy relationship. Feeling completely drained without knowing why, waking suddenly during the night with anxiety, constantly questioning your own memory, or sensing that the atmosphere of an ordinary conversation has suddenly changed. The message interprets these experiences as signs of spiritual interference. Whatever explanation a person ultimately accepts, the emotional reality described here is important. When a relationship repeatedly leaves you confused, fearful, exhausted, or unsure of yourself, something is seriously wrong. The speaker uses an image to explain this idea. Imagine a person standing beneath a dark layer or covering, with the individual still somewhere underneath it. In the spiritual interpretation, that covering represents the forces and wounds that have taken control of the person's behavior. The point of the metaphor is that you may have spent years trying to reach the person underneath, hoping that your love could somehow break through everything that was hurting them. That hope can become its own trap. You keep thinking that one more conversation might change things. One more chance might finally make them understand. One more act of forgiveness might bring back the person you first believed you knew. Sometimes, you may even see brief moments that seem to confirm that hope, humanity, and those moments can make leaving even harder because they remind you of what the relationship could have been. But the central message insists that another person's healing cannot become your responsibility. You can care about someone, pray for them, hope that they change, and still recognize that you cannot do the work for them. If they refuse to confront their own destructive patterns, no amount of love from another person can force that transformation to happen. This is also where the message shifts attention away from the person who caused the damage and back toward the person who survived it. Instead of continuing to ask, "Why didn't my love change them?" And the speaker encourages a different question. Why am I still carrying responsibility for their choices? That shift matters because constantly analyzing another person's behavior can keep you emotionally connected long after the relationship itself has ended. Message describes leaving as a form of protection. At first, freedom may not feel like freedom. Memories can remain, dreams can return, and moments of loneliness can make the past seem more attractive than it really was. Yet distance can gradually create something that was almost impossible to have inside the relationship. Clarity. And that clarity changes the meaning of everything that came before. You begin to realize that you no longer have to monitor every word, walk on eggshells, shrink yourself, or constantly prove your worth. You can finally experience your own life without organizing every decision around another person's reactions. The speaker calls that survival a form of spiritual protection. But even without accepting that explanation literally, the underlying message is clear. Getting away from a destructive relationship can create the space necessary to become yourself again. Then comes one of the most important warnings in the entire message. The past may try to return. The person may appear to notice your confidence, your peace, or the fact that you are rebuilding your life. According to this speaker, attempts to reconnect can sometimes come indirectly through messages, mutual acquaintances, or small reminders designed to reopen old doubts. Message urges you not to confuse renewed contact with genuine transformation. Someone reaching back into your life does not automatically mean they have changed. Real change requires accountability, self-examination, and sustained effort. Without that, returning to the same relationship can simply reopen the same cycle under a different appearance. That is why protecting your peace is not cruelty. It is not selfishness, and it does not mean you have stopped caring. Sometimes the most compassionate decision you can make for yourself is recognizing that another person's unresolved problems are not yours to carry. And once you understand that, the next challenge is no longer figuring out how to save them. It is learning how to finally save the part of yourself that was lost while you were trying. For a long time, you may have believed that closure would come from the other person. Maybe you imagined an apology, an explanation, or one final conversation that would finally make everything make sense. But the message argues that closure rarely comes from the person who created the confusion. It begins when you accept what happened without continuing to rewrite the story in your mind. That acceptance can be painful because it means admitting that love was not enough to change the situation. You may have done everything you knew how to do. You may have been patient, forgiving, supportive, and willing to give chance after chance. Yet none of those things could make another person confront problems they were unwilling to face themselves. This is where the speaker places responsibility firmly back where it belongs. The other person's choices belong to them. Their behavior, their patterns, and their refusal to change cannot become your lifelong burden. You can hope that they eventually find healing, but you cannot fight a battle on their behalf while destroying your own peace in the process. Message also warns that people often become trapped by the idea of potential. You remember who someone seemed to be at their best, and then you compare that version with who they repeatedly show themselves to be. But potential is not the same thing as reality. Someone's better side may exist, yet that does not mean you are required to remain in a situation that continually harms you while waiting for that side to appear. That realization can completely change the way you look at the past. Instead of asking why the relationship failed, you begin asking what it taught you. Instead of wondering whether you should have tried harder, you begin recognizing how much you already gave. And instead of measuring your worth by whether another person could love you properly, you begin understanding that their inability to do so was never proof that you were unworthy of love. Speaker then turns to the lingering connection that can remain after a relationship ends. It describes this as a spiritual cord, representing the emotional energy and attention still invested in the other person. Again, this is presented as a spiritual interpretation, but the underlying experience is familiar. Even after someone is physically gone, your mind can continue returning to them. You may find yourself checking for updates, asking mutual friends what they are doing, revisiting old conversations, or wondering whether they have finally changed. Each of those actions can keep a connection alive. The relationship may have ended in reality, but your attention can continue feeding the emotional attachment. Breaking that attachment is not necessarily an act of anger. The message presents it as an act of self-preservation and self-respect. Have to make a conscious decision that you are no longer going to organize your emotional life around someone who is no longer part of it. And that decision may need to be repeated more than once, because letting go is rarely a single moment. The speaker compares the attachment to a heavy coat made from old fears, patterns, and memories. You have worn it for so long that its weight begins to feel normal. Even when you know it is making life harder, habit can make you reach for it again. In the same way, returning mentally to an old relationship can feel familiar even when that familiarity is painful. But once you stop carrying it, the message says, you begin to experience a kind of freedom that is difficult to imagine while you are still attached. The past becomes a lesson rather than an open wound. Or C, the person becomes part of your history rather than the center of your present. And gradually, the question stops being whether they will ever change and become something much more important. Who are you becoming now? The speaker describes that transformation as an awakening. The relationship was not presented as a punishment, but as an experience that forced you to recognize patterns, establish boundaries, and understand what you will no longer accept. The difficult part was surviving the situation and recognizing what it was doing to you. The next part is choosing not to return to it. That does not mean healing happens instantly. There may still be mornings when memories return without warning. There may be nights when loneliness makes you question decisions you once knew were necessary. Those moments do not mean you are going backward. They can simply be the residue of an experience that had a major impact on your life. The message emphasizes that the person you were during that relationship does not have to be the person you remain forever. You can become more cautious without becoming closed off. And you can learn to recognize warning signs without losing your ability to love. You can believe in forgiveness while still understanding that forgiveness does not require continued access to your life. Most importantly, you can stop confusing compassion with self-sacrifice. Wanting someone to heal does not mean you must remain close enough to be hurt by them. Caring about their future does not require you to participate in their present. And praying or hoping for someone's transformation does not make you responsible for making that transformation happen. Message then returns to the idea that the person may still be trapped in the same patterns. They may continue repeating behaviors that harmed you, perhaps with someone else. Seeing that can reopen old questions. You may wonder whether the new person will somehow receive the version of them you were always hoping to see, but that comparison only keeps you connected. Their current relationship is not your responsibility, and their choices do not determine whether leaving was the right decision. What matters is what happened when you were there, what you experienced, and what you now know about what you need in order to feel safe and whole. This is why the speaker says you should stop looking backward for answers. There may never be an explanation that satisfies every question. There may never be an apology that repairs everything. And there may never be a moment when the other person fully understands the effect their behavior had on you. Closure then becomes something you create through acceptance. You accept that the relationship happened. You accept that you loved someone who could not give you what you needed. You accept that your efforts could not control another person's choices. And finally, you accept that walking away was not failure. It was the decision that allowed your life to continue. Once you stop waiting for the past to give you permission to move forward, the future becomes much easier to see. The speaker describes new opportunities, healthier connections, and a sense that life begins moving again after the old relationship no longer consumes your attention. Whether someone understands that as spiritual restoration or simply the natural result of gaining distance and clarity, the message is the same. Removing yourself from a destructive pattern creates room for something healthier to grow. And that may be the most important part of the entire journey. You are not being asked to forget what happened. You are being asked to stop allowing what happened to decide what happens next. There is another part of healing that the message wants you to recognize. Temptation interprets someone's return as proof that they have finally changed. When a person from your past reaches out, even indirectly, it can awaken emotions you thought were gone. Suddenly, memories become vivid again, and the mind begins asking the same questions. What if this time is different? What if they finally understand? What if I walked away too soon? But the message argues that contact alone proves nothing. A person can miss your presence without understanding why you had to leave. They can regret losing access to you without regretting the behavior that caused you to walk away. They can want another opportunity without having done the difficult internal work necessary to make that opportunity healthy. That distinction is essential because longing and transformation are not the same thing. Someone may feel the consequences of losing you and still remain unwilling to change themselves. They may become more careful about how they present their behavior while leaving the underlying patterns untouched. From the perspective of the original message, that is why returning to the same situation can be dangerous. The appearance may change while the pattern remains exactly where it was. The speaker describes your growing confidence as something that can expose what the other person has lost. When you begin rebuilding your life, their influence over you becomes weaker, and you stop needing their approval. You stop measuring your worth by their attention. And when someone was accustomed to having that influence, your independence can become a powerful reminder that they no longer control your emotional world. But there is an important reason not to let that realization become another form of attachment. Your healing cannot be about proving something to the person you left. It cannot depend on them seeing you succeed, regretting their actions, or realizing what they lost. If your entire recovery becomes a performance for the past, then the past is still controlling part of your life. True freedom comes when your progress no longer requires an audience. You do not need them to notice your confidence. You do not need them to regret losing you. You do not even need them to understand why you left. Your peace becomes enough on its own. Message repeatedly returns to the idea that you are not crazy, dramatic, or cruel for protecting yourself. That matters because unhealthy relationships can gradually teach people to distrust their own instincts. When your concerns are constantly dismissed, you may eventually begin questioning whether you are the problem simply because you are reacting to something that does not feel right. Learning to trust yourself again can therefore become one of the most important parts of recovery. You begin paying attention when something consistently makes you uncomfortable, or You recognize patterns instead of explaining each incident away. You stop automatically giving someone the benefit of the doubt when their behavior repeatedly contradicts their words. That does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It means becoming more discerning. The message acknowledges that believing in redemption and second chances can be beautiful qualities, but those qualities can also be exploited when they are given without boundaries. Compassion is valuable, but compassion without discernment can leave you vulnerable to repeating the same experience. And you do not have to stop believing that people can change. You simply have to stop making your own safety dependent on whether they eventually choose to change. Someone else's potential is not a contract that requires you to wait. Their future healing can happen without you standing beside them through every stage of it. This is where the message draws a firm boundary around sacrifice. You cannot sacrifice yourself to save someone who has not chosen to save themselves. If you continually try to pull another person out of a destructive pattern while they continue returning to it, you may eventually find yourself being pulled down with them. Metaphor of drowning captures that warning. Imagine reaching into deep water to rescue someone who refuses to let go of what is dragging them under. Your intention may be loving, but if you lose your own ability to stay above the surface, both people can end up in danger. Helping someone should never require you to destroy yourself. Future described in the message begins when that cycle ends. It imagines life opening up again once your attention is no longer trapped inside the old relationship. New opportunities can become easier to notice. Healthier people can enter your life. Moments of peace can return. And things that once seemed impossible may begin to feel normal simply because you are no longer living under constant emotional pressure. The speaker describes this as removing a blockage and allowing everything that had been stagnant to move again. That language is spiritual, but the emotional idea is straightforward. Your energy is no longer consumed by conflict, uncertainty, and constant analysis. You have more attention available for your own goals, relationships, and future. At the same time, the person you left may continue living inside the same patterns. The message describes them as still trapped, still repeating destructive behavior, and still influenced by the same forces. But the crucial difference is that you are no longer participating in that cycle. Their struggle may continue, but it does not have to become yours. That separation can feel uncomfortable because caring does not disappear simply because a relationship ends. You may still wonder whether they are okay. It may still hope that they eventually become healthier. You may even feel compassion for the person you once knew. None of that requires you to return. You can care from a distance. You can hope for someone's healing without becoming responsible for it. You can acknowledge that someone may have been wounded themselves while still refusing to excuse the harm they caused you. And understanding someone's pain does not require you to volunteer for more of it. And this is where the message offers perhaps its clearest definition of closure. Closure is not necessarily an explanation from the person who hurt you. It is the moment when you stop requiring that explanation before allowing yourself to move forward. You may never know every reason behind their behavior. You may never fully understand what happened inside their mind. There may be unanswered questions for the rest of your life. Your future does not need complete knowledge of the past in order to begin. The truth you do know is enough. You know what you experienced. You know how the relationship affected you. You know how hard you tried. You know what it cost you to remain. And you know what changed once you finally created distance. That knowledge can become stronger than the questions that once kept you awake. And Instead of asking whether you should have stayed longer, you can recognize that leaving was an act of courage. Instead of wondering whether you were loved enough, you can recognize that healthy love should not require you to continually abandon yourself. The message ultimately asks you to stop treating the relationship as a wound that must remain open until the other person provides an answer. Let it become a chapter. Or let it become evidence of what you survived, what you learned, and what you will recognize sooner in the future, because the goal is not to become the person you were before the relationship. Well, the goal is to become someone who understands themselves more deeply because of what they went through. And that transformation is already beginning the moment you decide that your past can teach you without continuing to control you. One of the hardest parts of moving forward is accepting that you may never receive the ending you imagined. You may have spent countless hours trying to understand why someone behaved the way they did, why they changed, or why the relationship became something so different from what you originally believed it could be. But eventually, there comes a point where continuing to search for answers only keeps you emotionally connected to the very situation you are trying to leave behind. Message asks you to recognize that your life has already changed, even if your emotions have not completely caught up with that reality. You have distance now. You have moments of clarity. You can wake up without immediately wondering what mood someone else will be in, or whether something you say will start another conflict. Those ordinary moments may not seem dramatic, but they are signs that you have reclaimed parts of your life that once felt unavailable to you. That is why the speaker repeatedly describes your survival as protection. Within the spiritual framework of the message, something greater intervened before the relationship could completely consume you. Whether someone interprets that literally or symbolically, the important point is that leaving created an opportunity to recover the parts of yourself that had been disappearing while you were trying to keep the relationship alive. You may still remember the person you were back then. You may remember how hopeful you were, how much you believed in the relationship, and how convinced you were that patience would eventually produce a different outcome. There is no reason to be ashamed of that person. They were trying to love, trying to understand, and trying to make something work with the knowledge they had at the time. But the person you are becoming now has knowledge that you did not have then. You have experienced patterns that you once could not recognize. You understand that words and actions are not always the same thing. You have learned that repeated behavior deserves more attention than occasional promises, and that someone showing a better side of themselves once in a while does not erase the pattern surrounding those moments. This new awareness can feel like a loss at first, because it changes how you remember the past. Some memories may no longer look as beautiful as they once did. Things you previously dismissed may suddenly appear more clearly. Conversations you once replayed looking for evidence that you were wrong may now show you that your instincts were trying to tell you something. The message encourages you not to punish yourself for ignoring those signs. You made decisions based on what you believed at the time. You hoped for the best because you cared. That does not make you foolish. It makes you human. What matters now is that you have the opportunity to use what you learned rather than continuing to blame yourself for not knowing it sooner. There is also a warning against allowing nostalgia to rewrite reality. When loneliness appears, the mind often remembers selected moments instead of the entire story. It remembers the laughter, the affection, the promises, and the version of the person you wanted them to be. But healing requires remembering the complete picture, including the reasons you eventually had to leave. You do not need to hate someone in order to maintain distance from them. Anger can eventually fade, but boundaries can remain. You can reach a place where the person no longer occupies your thoughts every day, where their name no longer has the power to change your mood, harmony, and where their choices no longer determine how you see yourself. The original message describes this as becoming whole again. That wholeness does not mean becoming exactly who you were before the relationship. It means developing a stronger understanding of yourself and refusing to surrender that understanding again. You learn that love should not require you to become smaller, quieter, more frightened, or less confident just to keep another person comfortable. And perhaps one of the greatest lessons is learning to distinguish between being needed and being loved. Sometimes a person can depend heavily on your attention, forgiveness, emotional support, or constant availability while giving very little genuine stability in return. Being necessary to someone's emotional survival is not the same as being treated with healthy love and respect. The speaker also emphasizes that you should not allow guilt to pull you backward. You may think about everything the other person has gone through and wonder whether leaving made their life harder. You may remember their wounds and feel responsible for helping them, but their healing remains their responsibility. Your decision to protect yourself does not make you responsible for the consequences of their refusal to change. This is especially important when the other person attempts to make you question your decision. If they suggest that you are heartless, selfish, or cruel for creating distance, remember that boundaries are not automatically acts of cruelty. Sometimes a boundary is simply the line that separates compassion from self-destruction. The message then turns toward the future and asks you to imagine what becomes possible when your attention is no longer consumed by the past. You have more time to create, more energy to build, more space for friendships, opportunities, and experiences that do not revolve around emotional survival. The future does not have to repeat the structure of the past. That future may not arrive all at once. Healing is rarely a straight line. There will be good days and difficult days, moments when you feel completely free, and others when a memory suddenly brings everything back. But a difficult day does not erase your progress. It simply means that you are still processing something that mattered deeply to you. The speaker describes those remaining feelings as residue rather than destiny. That distinction matters. Just because the past still affects you does not mean it owns you. Memory can exist without becoming a command. You can remember someone without contacting them. You can miss a moment without wanting the entire relationship back. Eventually, the attachment becomes weaker because you stop feeding it with attention. You stop checking. You stop asking for updates. You stop searching for hidden meanings in everything the other person does. You stop wondering whether they are thinking about you. And with every decision to remain focused on your own life, the past loses another piece of its influence. Or this is where the message's idea of reclaiming your energy becomes most meaningful. You begin giving your attention to things that can actually grow because of it. Your goals receive more focus. Your relationships become more intentional. Your sense of identity becomes less dependent on how another person sees you. You also begin developing standards that are based on reality rather than potential. Instead of asking whether someone could become the person you need, you start asking whether they are already treating you with the respect, consistency, and honesty you require. Instead of waiting for a promise to become behavior, you pay attention to the behavior that already exists. That does not mean demanding perfection from people. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has weaknesses. But there is a difference between imperfection and a repeated pattern of harm. And there is also a difference between someone who recognizes their mistakes and works to change them, and someone who repeatedly makes the same choices while expecting forgiveness to erase the consequences. Message ultimately asks you to protect what you have rebuilt. Your confidence, your peace, your ability to trust yourself, and your understanding of your own worth were not easily recovered. They should not be handed back to someone simply because they return with familiar words or memories. And that is why the next chapter of your life cannot be built around proving anything to the person from your past. It has to be built around becoming someone who no longer needs their approval, their apology, or their recognition to feel complete. The moment you stop waiting for them to validate your decision is the moment the decision truly becomes yours. The past may always be part of your story, but it does not have to remain the center of it. What happened shaped you, but it does not have to define you. And as you continue moving forward, the question is no longer whether you can survive without that person. You already have the answer. The final lesson is not about the person you left. It is about the life you are now free to build without carrying their choices on your shoulders. The message asks you to stop looking at your survival as evidence of what was wrong with you and start seeing it as evidence that you were capable of getting through something that once felt impossible. There may still be moments when the past calls for your attention. You might suddenly remember a conversation, feel lonely, or wonder whether things could have ended differently. But those thoughts do not require action. You can acknowledge them without reopening the door. You can remember without returning. The speaker's central message is that your future should no longer be organized around the relationship. You do not need to monitor what the other person is doing, wonder who they are with, or wait for them to recognize what they lost. Their life belongs to them. Your life belongs to you. That separation is important because even after physical distance has been created, emotional attachment can continue through memory. You may still carry the old version of the person in your mind. The person they appeared to be at their best, the person you hoped they would become, or the person you believed you could help. But that version cannot be allowed to replace the reality you experienced. The message encourages you to trust what you learned. You now understand that love does not mean accepting every behavior. Forgiveness does not mean giving unlimited access. Compassion does not mean remaining in a situation that repeatedly harms you. And believing someone can change does not mean waiting indefinitely for that change to happen. You are allowed to choose peace even when someone else does not understand your decision. You are allowed to leave without receiving permission. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself. Most importantly, you are allowed to protect the life you are rebuilding without feeling guilty for doing so. The spiritual language of the original message describes this as leaving behind a dark influence. That claim is part of the speaker's belief system, not something that can be independently established from the story itself. But the broader message remains consistent. After you were caught in a destructive pattern, you eventually created distance, and now you have the opportunity to stop repeating it. The speaker also says that the other person may someday change. Perhaps they will eventually confront their behavior, seek healing, and become different. But whether that happens is no longer your responsibility. You can hope that they find a better path while refusing to place your own future on hold waiting for it. That distinction can bring enormous relief. You do not have to hate them. You do not have to punish them. You do not have to spend your life proving that they were wrong. You simply have to stop allowing their unresolved problems to determine the direction of your life. And perhaps that is the real meaning of moving on. It is not pretending the relationship never mattered. It is recognizing that something can matter deeply and still need to end. A chapter can have been meaningful without being meant to continue forever. Your next chapter can be different because you are different. You have learned to notice warning signs, have learned that consistency matters. You have learned that someone's promises cannot substitute for their actions. Emern, you have learned that your instincts deserve to be heard rather than automatically dismissed. The message urges you to carry those lessons forward without carrying the pain itself. There is a difference between remembering what happened and remaining trapped inside it. Your experience can make you wiser without making you bitter. It can make you more careful without preventing you from loving again. Most importantly, you can stop thinking that surviving the relationship was the end of your story. It was not. It was one part of your story, and the fact that you are beyond it means something. You have already done the hardest thing. You recognize that staying was costing you too much, and you chose to leave. Now the responsibility is different. You have to build the life that becomes possible when you are no longer spending your energy trying to repair what you could never control. You have to give yourself permission to create, to grow, to form healthier relationships, and to discover who you are when fear is no longer making every decision for you. The speaker describes this as reclaiming the energy that was lost. In practical terms, that means reclaiming your time, your attention, your confidence, and your ability to make decisions based on what is good for you rather than what keeps someone else satisfied. Those things may seem ordinary, but after a deeply unhealthy relationship, they can feel like freedom. You should also remember that becoming stronger does not mean becoming incapable of vulnerability. You do not have to close your heart because someone once mishandled it. You simply need to become more discerning about who receives your trust and whether their actions demonstrate that they deserve it. The person you were before the relationship may never return exactly as they were, and that is not necessarily a tragedy. You have changed because of what you experienced. The goal is not to erase those changes, but to use them wisely. You can become someone who recognizes unhealthy patterns earlier, sets boundaries sooner, and refuses to sacrifice their identity just to keep another person close. So, when the past tries to pull you backward, remember what the message has been saying from the beginning. You do not have to return to something simply because part of you still remembers the good in it. A few good memories cannot erase an entire pattern of harm. And missing someone does not automatically mean you made the wrong decision. You can feel sadness and still move forward. You can feel compassion and still maintain distance. You can wish someone well and still understand that they no longer belong in your life. These things can exist together without contradiction. The original message ends with a powerful sense of forward movement. You have more to create, more to experience, more to give, and more of yourself to discover. Your story is not defined by the person who hurt you. It is defined by what you choose to do after you realize you no longer have to remain there. So, do not spend the rest of your life trying to understand a chapter that has already ended. Take what it is to you. Leave behind what destroyed your peace. Protect the confidence you fought to recover. And let the future be bigger than the relationship that once made you believe your world had become smaller. You survived. You learned. You walked away. And now you have something that was difficult to imagine while you were still inside that relationship. The freedom to become yourself again. A person from your past may remain trapped in their own choices, or they may eventually decide to change. That decision belongs to them. Your decision is much simpler now, to stop looking backward, to trust what you have learned, and to build the life that was waiting for you beyond that relationship. You do not need their apology to begin. You do not need their understanding to move forward. You do not need them to admit what happened before you can accept your own truth. You can close the door yourself, and once you do, the story does not end. It finally begins.